Growing up, I went to a large public high school with thousands of students. I knew the names of all the kids in my classes, but certainly not everyone in my entire grade. Going to a big school was definitely daunting at times, but I stuck to my close-knit friend group and things went okay. After graduation, I went to a large state university about an hour from where I grew up. It was the same college a lot of people from my high school also attended. I was studying to become a teacher. My first class of the day was a literature class. I didn't want to be late on my first day, so I got to the classroom well ahead of time. I glanced around the classroom in hopes of seeing a familiar face, but didn't recognize anyone. I told myself I would just have to work on making friends. I grabbed a seat towards the back of the class and scoped out the situation. Everyone seemed so confident and sure of what they were doing. As a freshman, I didn't feel that way at all. The class went relatively smoothly. The professor went over the syllabus, and we all had to go around the room and introduce ourselves. Before I knew it, class was over. I gathered up my things and was about to walk out of the room when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and there was a guy standing there with a scruffy black hair and glasses. "Hi," I said, waiting for him to say something. "Don't you remember me? We used to be in the same chem class." I stared at him for a second before it finally registered. Yes, we were in the same chem class once, but we had never talked before. All I remembered is that he would sit in the back of the class and would rarely speak. "My name's Brian," he told me, looking offended that I barely remembered him. He then began asking me questions about my classes and my major. I answered with short sentences, hoping he would get the vibe that I had another class I needed to get to and couldn't be late. He asked me if I wanted to grab coffee, but I told him that I was sorry and I had to get to class. "Some other time then," he said, before finally walking away. I had literature class 3 times a week. Brian began sitting behind me. He asked me countless questions about everything having to do with my life. He would push his desk so it was really close to mine, and once I even thought he leaned in to smell my hair. After every class, I would gather my things quickly and attempt to get out of the room as fast as possible, so Brian wouldn't have a chance to talk to me, but he would always run to catch up with me. Strangely, I began seeing Brian at other places besides just class. He would be behind me at bus stops, sitting nearby at the library, behind me in line at the coffee shop. At a small school, I might chalk this up to coincidence, but my college was huge. I began to feel as if he was starting to learn my schedule. One day after class, Brian grabbed my arm as I was about to leave. Reluctantly, I turned around to see what he wanted, and he pulled out a single red rose from his backpack and handed it to me. I asked him why he was giving me this, and he said he wanted to know if I would be his girlfriend. I paused, unsure how to respond, and then told him I couldn't accept this because I had a boyfriend that went to a different school. This wasn't true, but seemed like the best response at the time. He looked skeptical and asked me what my boyfriend's name was and what school he went to. I lied again. Suddenly, he threw the rose on the ground, stomped on it several times, and then stomped away. I was shocked by his aggressiveness and super creeped out. He seemed like he was becoming obsessed with me. That night, I saw I had a new friend request on Facebook. When I realized it was Brian, my heart sunk. I knew he had probably friend requested me to see if I had posted any pictures of my unexistent boyfriend. I decided to simply ignore the request and hope he didn't say anything about it. During the next literature class, I decided to sit on the opposite side of the room that I usually did. I was hoping Brian would get the point and leave me alone, but instead he took the open seat directly behind me. Just as I expected, he asked why I didn't have pictures of my boyfriend on Facebook. I told him I just didn't go on Facebook very often. He then told me he was going to fight to be the better man for me, and over time, I would see why he was the one for me. At this point, I thought he was crazy, and I didn't respond to him. I found myself dreading the days I had literature class. I decided to email the professor and tell him about the problem. He told me he taught the same class at a different time, and if that worked with my schedule, he could switch me into that group. Luckily, it worked out, and I switched out of Brian's class. Finally, I would be free of all of his creepiness. But on the first day that I switched classes, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a video message. I clicked on it and it was Brian, sitting in a dark room with candles all around him. His face was super close to the camera and his eyes looked crazy. He told me that I could switch class periods, but I could never escape him. He would always find me, and I would be his whether I liked it or not. My heart was pounding as I put down the phone. What a psychopath! I had never given him my phone number and I had no idea where he had gotten it from. At this point, I knew I had a serious stalker. I told myself I would go to the campus police station the next day and talk to them. Surely they would help me get a restraining order or something. The next morning, I decided to wake up extra early and grab a coffee before my first class. The sun was barely rising and there weren't very many people on the streets. I loved how peaceful it was. And suddenly, I heard the crunch of a leaf underfoot, letting me know there was someone right behind me. Before I could turn and see who it was, something slammed my skull and everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and I was in a room I didn't recognize. I was tied up at my hands and feet and there was duct tape all over my mouth. Brian was nowhere in sight, but I knew deep down that he was the person who had put me in this room. Who else would have? I physically stopped breathing when I took in my surroundings. It was my face, plastered over every surface. There were pictures of me playing tennis in high school, laughing with my friends, pictures of me walking to class, reading in the library. Worst of all, pictures of me sleeping. He had stalked me for far longer than I had even realized. I pulled myself into a sitting position and realized my phone was still in my pocket. I was trying to wriggle it out, but with my tied hands, I was really struggling. Suddenly, I remembered seeing a TikTok about a new iPhone feature. If you held down on the side button of the iPhone, it would call the emergency line. As I was doing this, the door swung open and Brian was standing there. "I'm so glad to see you haven't died yet. I can still have my fun with you," he told me in a dry voice. "As you can see, I'm your #1 fan," he said, gesturing to the pictures on the wall. "At least, I was, before you broke my heart," he told me, appearing as cold as ever. Then he reached into a large chest and pulled out long chains and shackles. He connected the chains to metal hooks on the ceiling. He then pulled a chair underneath the hanging chains. He grabbed me roughly and picked me up. He pulled me to the chair and fastened the shackles to my wrist. He then kicked the chair out from underneath me, causing me to fall, dangling in the air from just my wrists. My entire body weight was placed on my wrist. I could feel the muscles stretching beyond what they should have ever done. I screamed in agony, but the duct tape still covered my mouth. "If I can't have you, then no one can. But first, I'm going to make you regret every single time you ever rejected me." I was thrashing around trying to find a way to free myself. Brian just laughed at me like a maniac. He grabbed a paper bag from his chest and put it over my head so I couldn't see what was happening. I could feel him taking off my shoes and my socks, but I didn't know why. Suddenly, a surge of pain racked through me, and I realized I had been put in some sort of metal vise. They were being clamped down extra hard. The next thing I knew, the pain had spread to my left hand and then my right, and I knew he had put clamps around them too. I was gasping in pain and more terrified than I had ever been in my entire life. "I think I'll leave you like this for a while, just so you can prepare for death," Brian told me. What he said next terrified me to my core. "When I return, I'm going to hurt you the same place you hurt me, in the heart. Only, I'm going to do it with a knife." There were footsteps, and then the door slammed shut, and I knew I was alone. I dangled there, helpless and in pain. I thought of my family and my friends and how hard it would be when they found out I was dead and how it happened. I wondered if Brian would be captured and how long it would be before I was found. I wondered how painful death would be and how long it would take. I had so many regrets. I should have talked to the police sooner. I should have told the police I was being stalked. It didn't have to come to this. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang. It was the door being kicked in. "Here it comes," I thought to myself as I prepared to die. There were voices, but ones I didn't recognize. "She's in here! We need medical assistance!" a man yelled. The next thing I knew, the bag was being pulled off of my head and the room was full of police and paramedics. Brian was nowhere in sight. The paramedics went to work quickly, removing me from the chains and getting me down. They removed the duct tape from my mouth and unbound me. I was then placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. I was badly bruised and had a moderate concussion from when Brian had hit me, but I was expected to be all right. The police explained to me that Brian had hit me over the head with a crowbar and taken me to an old, abandoned warehouse, not far from the campus. They had tracked my phone and found me that way. They had ambushed Brian and taken him into custody. He's expected to spend many years in jail. One thing everyone should take from this video is don't wait until it's nearly too late to get help. When I was in high school, my parents let me walk home from school every day. I loved doing this because it allowed me to hang out with my friends after classes were over, and it made me feel independent. School would be over for the day at 3 p.m. And if the weather was nice, my friends and I would all gather in the courtyard at our school. We would sit around and work on homework, share snacks, discuss upcoming tests, and sometimes just hang out and talk. As long as I got home by 5 p.m., my parents wouldn't worry. It was before the time of smartphones, but I had a simple flip phone and would always text my mom before leaving school to let her know that I was on my way. I lived in a very safe area where there was very little crime. It was a small town and everyone was friendly with each other. It was common to run into friends at restaurants, grocery stores, or even in traffic. On one warm fall day, I was enjoying my walk home from school. The sun was shining bright and the leaves on the trees were just starting to change color. I was still a few blocks away from home and I reached a stoplight. The same stoplight I came to while walking home from school every day. There wasn't a ton of traffic on the street, but pedestrians were still expected to push the button and wait for the green walking symbol to signify that it was safe to go. When that symbol was on, traffic was expected to stop completely and wait until the person had completely crossed the road before going. I pushed the button, and when the green walking symbol appeared, I began crossing the street. There was a black truck parked at the stoplight. The driver rolled down the window and began yelling at me. I turned around to see what it was he wanted, thinking maybe he was someone I knew. It was a middle-aged man with a bald head and a hardened expression. His skin was very wrinkled, and he looked like someone who spent a lot of time outside, maybe doing manual labor. He whistled and began commenting on my body, talking about my figure as if I was no more than a piece of meat. I was a young girl, and his comments made me uncomfortable. I felt my face burning with embarrassment as I turned my back to the man and began walking faster, pretending I didn't hear him. When I didn't answer him, he became really angry. He began cussing at me and following me behind in his truck. At this point, I was getting scared, so I started running at full speed. I didn't want the man to know where I lived, so I took off down some random street while he continued to follow me. There was a gas station there and my parents were friends with the owner. I headed inside hoping the man wouldn't follow me. I killed time wandering through the rows of snacks, all the while keeping an eye out for the man. I didn't see him and figured he had gotten bored and moved on. I eventually left the gas station, walking as quickly as I could to my house. When I got home, I decided not to tell my parents about the incident. I knew they would get worried and not let me walk home alone anymore. This would take away the extra freedom I was so excited about having. The next day after school, I headed home completely comfortable. I was so sure that what had happened yesterday was a one-time event. I set off on the same path, being extra aware of my surroundings this time. I reached the same block where the gas station I had visited yesterday was located and was shocked to see what I thought was the same truck as before, parked in the lot. My stomach sunk as I realized he was probably waiting for me there. I took off running and didn't stop until I was all the way home. I looked around carefully before going inside my house, but saw nothing out of place. That night, I fell asleep quickly after being so stressed the night before. I was sleeping well until I felt something cold and sharp press against my throat. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I opened my eyes and saw a large, dark figure standing over me, knife in hand. Before I could scream, he slammed his large hand over my mouth. I blinked my eyes rapidly, trying to see who the person was. When I realized it was the guy from the truck, panic ran through my entire body. I began thrashing around trying to get away, but the man had pinned me down. He leaned so close to me that I could feel his hot breath on my face. He smelled like beer and cigarettes. You should have never ignored me. You're coming with me. Make a single sound and I'll kill you and your entire family. I noticed that my bedroom window was wide open. He must have climbed in. But how did he even know where I lived? There were so many thoughts and questions racing through my head, but my main concern was my family. I didn't care if the man hurt me if that meant my family would be okay. The man dragged me off the bed and I was suddenly aware of the thought that I was only wearing underwear with an oversized t-shirt. I braced myself for the possibility of him taking advantage of me. It seemed like the man's main objective was to get me out of the house. He guided me roughly to the door before opening it as quietly as possible. He pulled me out into the dark hallway. My parents' bedroom door was closed and I knew they slept with a fan on. They wouldn't hear a thing. The man guided me down the stairs, moving slowly, step by step. I didn't fight him and I didn't get in the way. I believed that he would be true to his word and hurt my family. When we reached the bottom level, he guided me into the living room. Suddenly, I noticed a familiar scent. It was coffee. Definitely a fresh pot. No sooner had I recognized the smell, did I see a figure sitting in the dark at the kitchen counter, mug in hand. It was my dad. The floorboards creaked and my dad turned to look over his shoulder. What happened next was a blur. My dad leapt up and lunged at the man, tackling him to the ground. They began wrestling and throwing punches. My dad was a strong man, but he was no match for my attacker, who was easily twice his size. I could tell the man was gaining on him. He had my dad pinned to the ground and he was trying to wriggle his knife out of the pocket. I knew I had to do something quick or this man was going to kill my dad. I raced across the kitchen to the sink where a dirty metal frying pan was sitting. I grabbed it, ran to the man just as his knife was raised, and I slammed it into the man's head as hard as I possibly could. He instantly fell to the ground, unconscious. My dad pulled himself up, grabbed the knife from the man, began shouting for my mom to call 911. The police arrived quickly, and the man was taken into police custody. My dad had a broken nose and was taken to the hospital to be treated while I stayed back and answered the questions the police had for me. They told me the man had likely been stalking me for weeks and would have probably killed me if he had gotten away with kidnapping me. It was a miracle that my dad happened to be awake that night in the kitchen after having trouble sleeping. If he wasn't, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. Be safe out there and sleep.
There is no fear as potent as the fear of the unknown. No monstrous visage discovered yet has been as terrifying as the infinite potential for horror which exists before the mask is removed. That is why we humans, in our naive understanding of the universal order, are gripped by a mortal fear of death. We think it the final frontier, the greatest imaginable unknown from whose penumbral shores no traveler may return. And so we cling desperately onto even the most dreary and anguished lives, suffering any known evil over our release into the beyond. But death is not to be feared, because death is very well understood. We have witnessed it, caused it, measured it, and recorded it to the last dying spasm of neuronal flickering. Even as I lie dying, it seems silly to me that I should be afraid of the emptiness which reason promised to expect. While I was alive, I wouldn't experience death, so there was no reason to be afraid now. When I was dead, I wouldn't be capable of experiencing anything, so fear still had no cause. That thought brought me great comfort, as I felt the last erratic struggle from my heart against the inevitable conclusion I approached. It wasn't until I was finally drifting off to sleep that a final intrusive doubt bubbled in my mind. What if it isn't death which is to be feared? What if it is what lies beyond? And so troubled that I slipped beyond mortal understanding, stepping into a world as far forsaken by reason as I was now from life. I was still in the hospital room, but the bustle of nurses and the beeping machines lost their opacity as though I was mired in swiftly descending dusk. It seemed as though every sound was an echo of what it once was, every sight a reflection. With each passing moment, The world was becoming less real. But all that sight and sound, all that being, it wasn't simply disappearing. It was transforming into a figure beside me. The less real my room became, the more real the figure was, until presently it existed in such sharp actuality that nothing beside it seemed real at all. His cloak was black. Not the color black, but its essence. It was as though seeing a tiger after a lifetime of looking at a child's cruel drawing and thinking that's all a tiger was. Reality flowed around his scythe like a brush through watercolors, and I could see each elementary particle in time itself sunder across its blade. Surely this, I thought, this is why we are taught without words to fear death. I clutched at my hospital blanket to cover from the intensity of the Reaper's presence, but the once soft cotton now flowed like translucent mist through my hands. I knew in that moment that nothing could hide me from the specter's grasp, for he was the only real thing in this world.
"You're late."
They weren't words. My head ached from the strain of this knowledge as my lateness was burned into my awareness, imparted like an inescapable law of physics, as unequivocal as gravity.
"We don't have time for the usual speech. Hurry now."
I felt myself swept up around him like dirt in a hurricane. Before I knew what was happening, we were outside of the hospital, moving at such a frenzied pace that the world around me blurred into a dizzying tunnel of flashing light.
If you're lucky, it will have gotten bored of waiting for you.
I had too many questions, all fighting for attention in the forefront of my brain without any making their way out.
You're quiet. I admire that. Usually people ask too much.
What's the point? I asked. My voice felt flat and dead compared to his overwhelming substance. How can I try to comprehend something so beyond mortal knowledge?
You can't. But it's still human nature to ask.
We weren't slowing. If anything, our pace was increasing. I wasn't running or flying or anything of that nature. It was more like the rest of the world was moving around us while we stood still. A vague darkness and a heavy damp smell made me guess that we'd gone underground, but I couldn't say for sure. One question, then, I asked. What else is here beside you?
And that is why questions are pointless. Death is not a place or a person. It's all there is.
Troubling thought, but made more so by the growing howl which began reverberating the rocks around me. We still seemed to be descending into the earth, and the air was growing warmer and denser now. The sound continued to mount as though the world itself was suffering. Then what is it?
What I'm here to protect you from.
The rock split with a flash from a scythe, and the ground opened further into a sprawling cavern dominated by a subterranean lake. But I thought you said you were all there is.
No, I said death was all there is.
We weren't moving any longer. Light glinted off the scythe from an unseen source and streamed into the lake like a tributary. Once inside, the light didn't reflect or dissipate, but swirled and danced like luminescent oil. I thought you were death.
Death is not a person.
The light was taking a life of its own inside the water. The still surface began to churn with an enigmatic energy. It took my scattered mind a long while to realize that was the energy flowing into the lake. I still felt tangled up with the figure, but we now existed as a beam of light boiling into the water. I knew I wouldn't understand, but that didn't stop me from feeling frustrated. If death is all there is, then what is it? What was waiting for me? The water pressed in around me and I couldn't speak, although I could still draw breath somehow.
It is here.
Something was in the water with me. Hands grabbed me by the legs and began dragging me downward. I was amazed to even discover that I had limbs again. They felt so alien to me that it was almost as though the body was not my own. Light flashed from the scythe. Then again, the hands let go. The howling rose once more. The Reaper was fighting something, although I couldn't make any sense of the battle except for the madness of thrashing water. The howling earth reached its crescendo. The screams made the water around me convulse and contract like a living fluid. Had the Reaper cut it? Was I safe? I began to explore my new body in the water, but just when I thought I was beginning to gain control, the hands clutched at me once more. I lurched downward, struggling in vain against their implacable grip. What is here? I tried to shout against the suffocating liquid. What is happening? But I couldn't sense the Reaper's presence any longer. The heat was unbearable, but the cold depths the hands were dragging me toward was even worse. I became aware of a blinding light at the bottom of the lake, and though I struggled, the hands dragged me inexorably downward.
I'm sorry. I couldn't fight it off. We will try again next time.
The pressure, the heat, the noise, the hands dragging me into the blinding light. I closed my eyes and screamed. I was free from the water now, but I just kept screaming. I couldn't bear to look at it. Whatever had stolen me, whatever was death but wasn't, whatever even the Reaper could not defeat. Then words spoke. Real human words from a real human mouth. My senses were so distraught that I couldn't make sense of them, but I'm guessing they were something like, "Congratulations, he's a healthy baby boy." Most people can't remember the day they die, or the day they were born. I happen to remember both, and I know that they are the same.